Aloha everyone and welcome to Storytime. One of the other books that was chosen for today is a book called The Princess Kaiulani. It's the story of Kaiulani's life and just wanted to share this one with you. It was written by Helen P. Hoyt and illustrated by Jackie Black, and it's an Island Heritage book published by the Island Heritage Society in Honolulu. So this is the story of the Princess Kaiulani. You see those pictures? Dear Grandma, I hope you and Grandpa are feeling fine. And thank you so much for the box that you sent. I just love the dolls. Yesterday we had a fashion show. All of the dresses looked cute on them. Oh, Grandma, the darling little Hawaiian doll is so pretty. Remember, you promised to tell me a story about her. You said she was a princess. Tell me the story. Was she a real princess? And did she live in Hawaii? I can't wait to get your letter, Grandma. Please hurry and write. Love, Lonnie Shed. P.S. Happy Easter from the dolls and I. Dear Lonnie, I was so happy to get your letter and know that you like the dolls and dresses. To answer your questions about the Hawaiian doll takes my memory back a very long time. Let me tell you the story of Princess Kaiulani. Yes, Lonnie dear, she was a real live Hawaiian princess. She was the most royal princess of the Kingdom of Hawaii. Her name was Victoria Kaiulani. The story about her begins a very long time ago in June 1851, when the Briggs sisters arrived in Honolulu. On board the ship was a young man by the name of Archibald Cleghorn. He didn't know it then, but he was going to be Princess Kaiulani's father. When Archibald Cleghorn grew up, he fell in love with King Kalakaua's sister. Her name was Princess Like. With permission from the king, the lovely princess and the handsome Scotsman were married. Their marriage was very romantic and exciting. The large house where they lived became the center for all the important parties and dances. Their house is now called the Pacific Club. Princess Like, who became Mrs. Cleghorn, was the most popular hostess in Hawaii. My Lonnie, I wish I could have been invited to those colorful parties, but your grandma wasn't even born yet. It was in that same house in 1875, on October 16th, that Victoria Kaiulani was born. All of her aunts and uncles and cousins were very happy about the baby. You see, Lonnie, none of them had any children of their own. Kaiulani was baptized on Christmas Day. Her uncle, King Kalakaua, was her godfather, and her godmother was Aunt Princess Ruth. They gave the little baby a beautiful Hawaiian name, Victoria Kawaiku Kaiulani. Lunaala au Kala Inua a Hilapala Papa Cleghorn. There was much rejoicing on the islands. It was here, my darling Lonnie, that Victoria Kaiulani grew up. It was a beautiful childhood, riding her beautiful pony Fairy, climbing in her birthday banyan tree and swimming in the ocean. She loved all those things, and she loved to feed the peacocks. They were her mother's pets. Although she was always guarded by her nurse, Kau, Kaiulani was allowed to play with the children of the servants' families. She had no brothers or sisters of her own. Running and playing with the other children was great fun, but on Sundays she had to be very proper. She and her parents rode in the Cleghorn carriage to church at St. Andrew's every Sunday morning. As I said before, Lonnie, there were many, many parties given by the Cleghorns. King Kalakaua had made Mr. Cleghorn the governor of the island of Oahu. Of course, the little Princess Kaiulani had to go to the parties. In that way, she learned the good manners a princess must have. She adored her attractive mother and watched her talk to the many guests. Little did she know that very soon she would lose this gentle teacher forever. When Kaiulani was only 12 years old, her beautiful mother died. Somehow, with help of her father, her friends, and her pony, Fairy, she overcame the terrible sadness of losing her mother. But many times when all alone, she would creep up into her banyan tree and weep tears of sadness. But there was more sadness to come. It was not easy to be a princess. The king and Mr. Cleghorn talked about the future of Hawaii and about the time when Princess Kaiulani would become the queen. They decided that Kaiulani must go to England. There she would learn to become a real princess. Can you imagine how it was for that poor little girl? How she must have felt, Lonnie? First she lost her mother, and now she was going to lose Hawaii, her banyan tree, and Fairy, her beloved pony. Kaiulani did not want to go to England. One day she was grieving under the big banyan tree when someone touched her quietly on the shoulder and asked, "Why are you so sad, little one?" She looked up into the big sympathetic eyes of Robert Louis Stevenson, who then was staying in Waikiki. Kaiulani told him of her sadness, and they quickly became friends. After that day, they saw each other many times. Sometimes he read her the stories that he was writing for children. Sometimes he would tell her stories of his home in England, and Kaiulani ceased to be afraid and sad. Just before she and her kahu boarded the steamer to go to England, Robert Louis Stevenson wrote her a very special poem. He told her she could read the poem whenever she felt homesick, and then she would remember her real home in sunny Hawaii. This is the poem. Forth from her land to mine she goes, the island maid, the island rose, light of heart and bright of face, the daughter of a double race. Her islands here in southern sun shall mourn their Kaiulani gone, and I, in her dear banyan shade, look vainly for my little maid. But our Scots islands far away shall glitter with unwonted bay. The cast for once her tempest spy to smile in Kaiulani's eye. Robert Louis Stevenson. Isn't that a lovely poem, Lonnie? It comforted little Kaiulani so far from home, and she read it often. Kaiulani stayed in England for 8 years. Bit by bit, she became less sad, and her bright yellow dress became known in the courts of Europe. This pretty young Hawaiian maid left a trail of broken hearts wherever she went. You see, Lonnie, she was a real princess. She could have fun, but her heart belonged to the people of Hawaii. Then one morning the official word came. The kahu brought a letter from faraway Hawaii. King Kalakaua had died. Queen Kaiulani, who had no children, declared that her niece, Princess Victoria Kalani, was to be the next queen of the Kingdom of Hawaii. That was a happy year for the 16-year-old princess. But, my dearest granddaughter, I'm sorry to have to tell you this. Kaiulani never became the Queen of Hawaii. It seems that Queen Kaiulani lost her throne. The kingdom first became a republic and later asked the United States to protect them. Before all of that happened, Kaiulani and Mr. Theo Davies, who was her guardian, went to Washington. Although President Cleveland had everyone there, and everyone there loved the charming princess, no one was able to stop the revolution in Hawaii. So Princess Kaiulani, at age 18, became a private citizen like you and me. That's the story, Lonnie. I hope you enjoyed it. Perhaps you can read it to your dolls. Love, Grandma. Dear Grandma, that was such an exciting story that you wrote for me. I told it to all of my dolls and all my friends, and they liked it too. Everyone, and me too, wants to know what happened to Kaiulani. Did she marry like a fairy princess and live happily ever after? Will you tell me in your next letter, Grandma? Love, Lonnie. Dear Lonnie, the end of the story of the Princess Kaiulani is the saddest part of all. Let me tell you what I remember about it. Kaiulani came back to Hawaii and lived in Ainahau with her father. Shortly after returning, she became ill, and no amount of medical care and affection seemed to help her. On March 6, 1899, she died. She was not yet 24 years old. Lonnie, all the people of Hawaii were grief-stricken. For them, it was not only the loss of their beautiful young princess, but the tragic end of the royal kingdom of Hawaii. Now, before ending this letter, I must tell you about the funeral in the islands. Although I was just a little girl like you, I have never forgotten that event. Your great-grandfather was part of the honor guard. The body of the princess was brought from home to Kawa'ahau Church at midnight. Torches lit the way. I stood on the sidewalk in a crowd of grieving Hawaiians as the princess was brought up the street in an army gun carrier. It was the deep, dark quiet of midnight. There was not a sound. Even dogs and chickens had been removed for blocks around. I remember wondering why the horses were so quiet when I saw their hooves were wrapped in blankets. The honor guard carried the casket up the steps of the church and placed it on the bier where the flag and the lays. The people silently filed into the pews of the church. No one spoke. We waited in silence. Suddenly, an old Hawaiian woman began a chant, a death wail for the princess. Her voice rose and fell as she chanted. It seemed as though the sorrows of the whole world were in that wail. As her voice died away, another elderly Hawaiian took up the wail. 4 different elderly women wailed and chanted their wails for the dead princess. After 3 days, the honor guard formed again and carried the princess and her casket to the gun carrier. There were no horses for anyone this time. The honor guard rolled the Cassian along King Street, up Nanu Avenue to the mausoleum. No one rode, everyone walked. Here the elderly Hawaiian caretaker unlocked the door, and they placed Kaiulani and her casket in the space reserved for her body. The door to the mausoleum was locked again. The guns boomed on Punch Bowl, telling the whole town that the princess was in her last earthly resting place. God bless you, Grandma.